Michelle and Mike's community conversation. We're happy to provide an update on how things wrapped up at the end of the legislative session and take questions from anybody who wants to come on the call or follow up with us later. It's been a very strange session, and I'm very grateful after a lot of challenges due to COVID and keeping us safe through remote legislating. It appears that we're going to be able to meet in person and have a more regular session in January next year, which will be a blessing for all of us. But in the meantime, we really did do a lot of good hard work with the limited circumstances that we had. And Mike and I spoke about this ahead of time, and I'll give updates about a few of the pieces of legislation that we passed out that I'm feeling good about. Mike can do a little more, and we'll go from there. I do think, as far as I'm aware, the huge majority of the bills that we passed out of the House, if they were signed by the Senate, the governor also signed them. There have been a few, there have been some vetoes, and we're actually going to have a veto override session next week to address some of those. But in terms of some of them that have been signed into law, that's what I'm going to update on right now, because those are the ones that we know are going to happen and are going to be influencing Vermont. So one of the big areas that we spent a lot of time in this last session, was finding ways to effectively invest in Vermont to try and use federal funds in ways that would help our state rebuild as effectively and as quickly as possible. And so we ended up spending $115 million in ARPA funds, the emergency relief funds, in water and sewer projects, which might not sound that exciting, but it really is, because the truth is a lot of our infrastructure has been neglected for a long time because it's really expensive to address those kinds of problems. And now we got this influx of federal funds, and we're going to be able to use some of those to make changes in our water and to upgrade our sewage systems, including in places like our state parks, which are a great place to go anytime, but especially so during COVID. So that's one area I feel really good about, is the fact that we were able to propose and pass out of the House and move all the way through a lot of support for infrastructure replacements, particularly related to water readiness. Another area related that got a lot of funding was through the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. The committee that I serve on, Corrections and Institutions, worked really closely with them, and we funded millions and millions of dollars in both renovations for historic buildings, low-income housing, trail renovations to open new routes for recreation. Lots and lots of good things that are going to help really Vermonters all across the spectrum. And so yesterday, actually, I took a hike up to the top of the pinnacle with my daughter and my granddaughter, and I got to the top, and there was this sign up there that said, you know, funded in part by the Vermont Conservation Housing Board. And I thought, and I told my daughter, I said, we did that. And she said, what do you mean, the family? And I said, no, the legislature. But I said, I feel like I was a part of that. And now I know this is part of what we do. So those are a couple of the areas that I'm feeling good about. One other one that I wanted to touch base about was childcare. My kids are all grown up, but for a lot of Vermonters, finding adequate childcare has been a huge challenge during the pandemic, before the pandemic, and it's going to be one after the pandemic. But we passed a very landmark childcare bill, which was H-171, that impacts really all layers of childcare. It puts funding in for scholarships for people that might want to go into those fields, because it's expensive to get educated and to get certified. That's a challenging task. And when you go into childcare, that's not a high paying field. So we're hoping that providing scholarships will make it easier for people that are interested in working with young children to get those skills, get that certification, and then be part of providing those services to others. And in conjunction with that, part of the childcare bill is providing a lot of influx in funds to make childcare both affordable for families and also to support a range of different places that will be hosting childcare opportunities for people around the state. So there were a lot of people that were really early on in the session. I probably heard more about the childcare bill than any other bill. And we actually passed it earlier than a lot of the other ones. But I think even though it was earlier in the session, I think it's an important one for us to remember, because it is one that's really going to impact working families. It's going to impact every kind of family that has children that have working parents. And so that's another one that I feel really good about. So I guess, Mike, I'll pass it on to you. I mean, we passed an awful lot of bills. We could talk about this all morning long, but I'll go ahead and hand it over to Mike and let him give a couple updates about some legislation that he feels good about. Matt, you have a question?
Yeah, on the veto overrides, which one did he veto?
The vetoes that we're going to be doing, the overrides regarding, two of them are related to charter changes. One of them is in Winooski and one of them is in Montpelier. And they both are related to the issue of non-citizen residents being able to cast elections in local races. And as a legislature, we felt very strongly that the local communities should be able to determine who gets to vote in local races. And we're talking about things like school board races. Yeah. And it was very clear in both of those towns, the charter bills passed by a large margin. And it passed in our House, it passed in the Senate, and the governor decided to veto it. So we're planning on going back and doing an override in those two. And I believe there's also a bill related to housing that we are going to hope to override as well.
Thank you.
You're muted, Mike.
Thanks, Michelle. You know, one of the concerns we certainly know well in this area is that the governor is ignoring the vote of local people here. And we certainly saw that with our votes in Act 46, where local votes were ignored. And that's what the governor's doing with his vetoing these charter changes. They were overwhelmingly supported by local voters. And I think it's our role to support local voters. This is the basis of democracy. And we've had efforts to suppress votes all around the country. And I certainly don't want to go down that route in Vermont. So that's one of the big issues there. So anyway, thank you, Michelle. And I hope in a little while you might give us some updates on your committee and what we've been doing in justice reform and corrections. I know there's a lot that has been going on here. So so for those who don't know me out there in the TV audience, my name's Mike Mrowicki. I'm one of the 2 representatives for the Wyndham 4 district of Putney, Dummerston, Westminster, what we like to call the heart of the Southeast Kingdom here. And first of all, I want to thank Vermonters. Vermont was the first state to hit 80% vaccination rate, and Vermonters have just done an incredible job in working together, first of all, to stop the spread, to stay home, stay safe, to wear masks, and now to get vaccinated. And, you know, we're well over 80% now, one of the best in the country, actually one of the best in the world. So I want to thank Vermonters for doing that, for working together. I want to thank a lot of other people too, from our medical providers, food workers, the people who showed up every day in our food stores to make sure we had food, teachers, childcare providers, the first responders. You people kept this state going, and we owe a real debt of gratitude to you. So a big thanks to you. Legislating can be humbling a lot of the times, and especially so seeing the work that you did, and hopefully what we did can support your work. So we did a lot of things. We passed over 100 bills. As Michelle said, the governor vetoed 3. We're going to be going back this week to see if we can override those. As we looked to help Vermonters move past COVID, one of the things we kept in mind is we didn't want any Vermonters left behind. We wanted to make sure if you were out of work that you were getting unemployment. And I know a lot of people struggled with that. We're going to see what we can do to beef up the system so it doesn't ever happen again. We've tried to help a lot of businesses. We tried to help people who were having trouble just getting food. And one of the programs that really has taken off across the state started right here in Wyndham County, the Everyone Eats program. That was where everybody could get access to a prepared meal from one of our fine restaurants in the area. And what we asked is that if if they could, they buy their food locally from local providers, that we made food available to everyone. So that meant the providers got money paid for this. The restaurants got made for preparing them. People, people were able to get meals already prepared just by showing up. And so I think that's the Vermont spirit. We tried to help a lot of businesses get going here, and that's an important piece of what we need to do, because moving forward, we want Vermonters to build back better. As President Biden continues to say, we want to build back better. We want Vermont to do better as we move ahead, and see how we can take those federal dollars and put them to good use. Some of the ways we wanted to make Vermont better, though, too, is if you look around the country, there's a lot of states that are trying to pass bills that are actually making it harder to vote. Now, Vermont is not going that way. We passed a bill that actually makes it easier to vote. This last election, we had record turnout, and that's the way it should be. Democracy depends on people getting out to vote. So we expanded voter access. We're going to keep vote by mail in general elections and primaries. And the other thing we did, and I know it has some controversy, but we felt it was an important thing to do, that if you make a mistake on your mail-in ballot, you can go back and cure that ballot. Yeah. It wasn't done a lot. I know that talking to the town clerks in the area, I think there were maybe 4 or 5 ballots in each of the local towns. And we hope that doesn't prove to be a lot of work for them, but we want voters to have that option. One of the things we found, though, as well, is that Vermont was not dealing with just one pandemic, but 3. We were dealing with COVID, dealing with climate, and systemic racism. And it's important that we continue working on all of them. As COVID recedes, climate's still going to be there, and justice, equality is going to be there. And what we're trying to do is make Vermont a welcoming place for everybody. And what we found is that for people of color, people from somewhere else, it can be tough sometimes. One of the things we did was 2 years ago, we created the Office of Racial Equity. We hired Susanna Davis to run that. She has done a great job. What we found is that there's a lot more work than one person can do. So we put 2 more positions in that office, and we will be watching it to make sure that if she needs more help, she's going to get it. This is an important thing. When it comes to racial justice, we want to make sure Vermont can look back and say, we've done everything we can. We passed a bill that promotes healthcare equity. I'm just going to give you some highlights from what we've done in terms of racial and social equity, though. Healthcare for undocumented children and pregnant women. What we found is that, a lot of our farms depend on migrant workers, and some of the people weren't getting the healthcare that they need, and especially if a mom was expecting, we want them to be able to get prenatal care. We want them to get postnatal care. So we passed a bill that makes sure they can get access. We passed a bill based on something Curtis Reed from Brattleboro has been working on, and that's promoting economic opportunity for BIPOC businesses. Curtis has been working with businesses run by people of color and trying to get government to give some extra help. And we put money to create a position to do just that in the Agency of Commerce. Equitable access to transportation is another one that we passed. We passed a bill that declares racism as a public health emergency. And what that will do is open up more services. We feel that, and what we've seen is that BIPOC Vermonters don't have equal access to healthcare. A big one we did, and I know it's symbolic, but it goes way back, is the legislature apologized. We issued a formal public apology for eugenics. This is not a piece of our history that we can be proud of. This was when forced sterilization was implemented on people of color, on French Canadians, on Native Abenaki, and people, anybody who was declared not suitable to reproduce. It was not a good part of our history. We eliminated the trans panic defense, penalties for hate motivated crimes. We clarified the use of force for police, and we put together something that's going to start a better collection of statistics for racial inequities in regards to law enforcement. We need that information if we want to get a true reading of the landscape here. And as we move forward, we want to base what we do to make sure we have equity in the enforcement of laws here. And I think I'm going to segue over to Michelle now, because that gets into the committee that she's on, which is looking both at the equitable implementation of law and how it works in our prison systems, and how a lot of what's happening in our prison systems would be different if we had different and better mental health services. So Michelle, is that something you want to take up now?
Sure, I can give a little update. I mean, the truth is we spent an enormous amount of time in the Corrections and Institutions Committee. The corrections part was looking at ramifications from the relatively long history of sexual impropriety that was happening between some staff and some individuals at the Chittenden Regional Facility. So there was a report that came out by Downs Rachlin Martin. We spent a long time going through and looking at that. And then we crafted a committee bill, which the idea was that we were going to help to craft a bill that was going to provide a sort of a foundation that would be preventative, so that these kind of issues wouldn't get to the level that they got to after many years of things not being addressed in a timely way. And so the bill that we proposed, and which was signed into law, the corrections bill, I believe it was H435, I think is the number we ended up with, but a lot of it was corrections related to how to make a more safe environment, particularly for our female incarcerated women. And it included things like access to telephones in public spaces, so that you could do reporting and not have to go and be supervised by somebody else if you wanted to make a report. So you had some more privacy for making reports. It included setting up 2 different types of investigative committees, which would look into any potentially problematic concerns that had been raised, either by individuals themselves or from any other sources. And so that was, in terms of legislation that was actually passed, that was probably the most significant work that my committee did, was working on the bill that addressed the corrections, which would address problems in the Chittenden Women's Facility. That said, we also spent a lot of time looking at proposed models. If we were going to have upgraded facilities, both for our women's facility and for other places in the state where people are incarcerated, what would that look like? So we met with some people who had spent a long time working on proposing some different designs for how we could have better care, how we could have transitional living facilities as opposed to just correctional facilities. And nothing has been decided definitively yet, but the ball is rolling in terms of, like, right now, the Chittenden Women's Prison is really old and outdated, and nobody should be living there. The conditions there are just not up to the standards that we want to keep anybody. And so what we're looking at right now is, if we're going to replace that facility, what would be a better model for that? And we spent a lot of time looking particularly into this transitional model, where maybe some of the women that are currently in the highest level of restrictive space in the correctional institution, maybe they really could be in a transitional living facility where they could be there part of the day and get supports, but also go out and work in the community, or maybe take classes or do volunteering. So a succession of opportunities that could be earned so that the individuals would be able to transition more smoothly back into the community. Because I think everyone knows that once people get into the system of corrections, there tends to be problems with recidivism. So what can we do that will help to reduce that, that will help people to thrive when they're back in the community instead of fall back into same patterns? So we spent a lot of time looking at that, and we're only partway through the biennium, so we really haven't made any definitive decisions about that. And our committee actually isn't even in complete agreement about what would be the best way to go with all of those different options. But we have been spending a lot of time taking testimony from many, many different stakeholders, advocating for what can we do to make our system the best that it can be. Honestly, there still are many areas where there's work to be done. I mean, Mike mentioned the issue of mental health. I mean, mental health is still not dealt with as well as it could be anywhere in our state, and particularly in corrections. But we're working on that. I mean, the state is working on that. And so I do see some steps moving in a hopeful direction. And when we get back next year and we're actually in the building and able to meet with more people in a more direct and traditional model, hopefully we'll come up with some good solutions. Yeah, I think that would be the main thing. I don't know, did you want me to talk about the institutions, Mike, or just the corrections part? Okay, all right. So just to, I mean, in terms of my committee is called Corrections and Institutions. And so about half of what we do is related to the correction system, and the other half is institutions. And the largest part of that is addressing the capital bill. So we literally go through item by item and look at every courthouse that needs to be renovated and updated with HVAC equipment. So like in our case, it happened that Windham County was the first courthouse that was able to reopen after COVID. That was partly due to funds that we put in that got approved and are moving along to make our courthouses more safe. So that was only one example, but all around the state, there were many, many examples of that, where we had courthouses, we had public buildings, we had roadways, we had state parks, we had all kinds of different facilities around the state, including our state colleges and University of Vermont, that the capital bill put funding in to support those different projects. And in some cases, we were sort of level funding and supporting what's been happening for a long time. And in other cases, we were able to put substantially more funds in because we had money that came in through the federal government. And that both saves our budget to be able to use it in other ways within our state, but it also makes us able to make a huge dent into some of these issues that have been really longstanding. Like I was talking about sewage and infrastructure. We were able to put a lot of funding into areas that have been waiting for change for a long time. And one other one, I mean, in terms of the water issue, on my committee, we spent a lot of time listening to testimony related to how we could do water clarification projects. So people may have heard about like the problems in Bennington where there was polluted soil. Well, there are a number of spots around our state where we have water that is not safe to drink. And so part of what our committee did was we looked at those situations and helped to provide some one-time grants so that communities could get their water back in a condition that it can be used for the needs that people have for water, because we need that. We need our people to be able to have clean water. That is a basic human right. And it's something that we were able to provide for this year that was really important and really valuable. So yeah, I would say those are the main updates in those two areas. The capital bill was an enormous project, but we really did support a lot of different kinds of improvements in our state that are going to both continue and improve what we had before. And in corrections, we were looking, as I said, primarily at the Chittenden Women's Facility and putting some new policies in place that would prevent the kind of problems that have happened there in the past. And also look at how can we make that and other systems more effective, more humane, more restorative in the future.
Well, thank you, Michelle. These are certainly pieces of what's happening in Vermont that we don't always focus on, but that are as important as anything we do. So I see Tony Elliott has joined us too, and I want to welcome Tony. Tony, I don't know if you have any questions for us or any comments that you want to share.
Nothing offhand today. I just wanted to see how things were wrapping up for the season.
Yep.
Been very busy.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear. I assume it's good busy, and we have been busy as well. And I think one of the things I did want to share is that Michelle and I have put together reports on this, along with this oral report we're doing on here, and we can mail them out. We can email them out. They'll be on our websites too. And as we go along with the this program, they'll put Brattleboro TV will put some links on here that people can access them to. You can always contact us if you have any more questions or suggestions. One of the things I did want to mention too, because I see Matt Conklin on here, and Matt generated a lot of interest in the bottle bill we just passed. Now, our bottle bill is almost 50 years old here in Vermont, and it been a long time since we did anything to update that. And this year we did. And one of the challenges is the whole landscape of what we put in bottles anymore has changed incredibly in the last 50 years. 50 years ago, who would have thought that many people wouldn't think about getting a drink of water without opening a bottle of water? Most of us just went to a faucet somewhere. Some of us would just go to a hose outside and take a drink like that. But it's changed. There are a lot of other things we put into bottles, and we feel that that should be part of the mix when it comes to what we return. So now we're going to include water bottles, wine bottles, hard cider, iced tea containers, and things like that. And the idea, as it was to start with, was to reduce litter on our roadways. There was a time when the common habit was if you were walking along, driving along, you finished a soda or something, you just threw it on the ground. No more. That has changed a lot, but still there's a lot that goes on our roadways, and that inspires a lot of people to go out, and I know younger people especially want to make a few dollars, they go out and start collecting returnable bottles. There's going to be a lot more options for that. What we also hope is it's not just going to reduce roadside litter, but it's going to expand the number of redemption centers. Now, I know that's something that Matt Conklin pointed out to us, that Westminster does not have one. Bellows Falls does not have one. I know in Putney, you can go to the general store or the co-op and we'll take back bottles. And Brattleboro has a redemption center. Springfield has a redemption center. But we need to have more. And that's one of the things that this bill will provide for. Another thing that we have heard a lot about during COVID is broadband access. Now, I know Michelle is one of those people, through no fault of her own, she would be glad to have high-speed broadband there. But the companies that are in charge right now, providers, have decided that it's not profitable, and so they don't do it. And that's why we are part of a county-wide effort here to create a CUD, Communications Union District. This is a model that started out in the Norwich, Vermont area. The EC Fiber Group started in Norwich, has now expanded to 25 towns in the Upper Valley. And this is a nonprofit cooperative effort that is an internet provider. They provide everything the big companies do. It's internet, phone, TV, and they do it at a reasonable cost. And the most important piece is they provide service to the last mile, the last road, and the last address. Now, if anybody lives in any of those situations, you know, if it's not satellite, you're not going to get it. And while the satellite options out there are better than dial-up, they're not much better. And for people who actually have a business, the standard that we're pushing is 100 gigs up and down, symmetrical service. And if you're running a business, as we move forward, that's what you're going to need. So we're putting a bunch of money into that. It's $150 million to start. And then when the federal infrastructure bill comes that we hope Congress will pass in the fall, we hope that will include more money to that. So that's one of those pieces where we feel Vermonters are speaking and we're listening. So Matt, you have a question on that?
Yeah, one of the ways to get the price down is through competition, and there just isn't any. And I don't know if I can list names. Can I list the company?
I think we should be careful about that.
All right.
Yeah.
There just isn't any. And I know within our own providers, the cost is just keeps going up and up and up.
Yeah.
So we keep, and we're losing channels, we're losing programs, and we have no say in it whatsoever. So competition would be the ticket.
Well, what we're finding, and this is interesting, as the competition starts to rise up, and this is a DV Fibers is what it's called in Windham County, because it started in the Deerfield Valley, up in the Wilmington area, where there's some towns that just have no broadband. As we're getting closer and closer to starting to hang cables, we're finding the companies that we will not name right now are all of a sudden getting interested in expanding. So let's keep our eye on that. But you're right. Competition can help push this along, and hopefully it can drive prices down.
So Mike, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say another thing I wanted to mention at some point for people that might be watching this on video later. Both Tony and Matt have been involved in a new community grassroots group called Humanity Network, which is an equity group that's been forming over the last few months. I have a Westminster neighbor who came to me and said, wow, there's a lot that's wrong in our state. Women of color are being bullied. People are stepping down or not wanting to run from office. We need to do something to support our neighbors and to be a more welcoming community. What can we do? So we've been exploring that. So over several months, we've been meeting at various increments with various groups of people. And it's largely people from Rockingham and Westminster, although we have a smattering of people who have attended our so far all online meetings over the last few months. But we're actually going to be offering an in-person event, our first in-person event on July 8th at the Rockingham Library. And depending on the weather, it might be outdoors or it might be indoors. But we are going to be offering, it's a communication workshop facilitated by a team from the West River Restorative Justice Group and working on circle process skills. So how can you sit with your neighbors, sit with your boss, sit with people in your community, and have the most effective kind of communication? And so I'm just wanting to let people know that that is happening on July 8th. It's an in-person event. If people are interested, you can contact me later, contact me at my ledge email, and I will give you more specifics relating to that. But our hope is we will have a lot of people come to that to learn those skills so that if issues continue to come up in our communities, which they will, we will all have better communication skills so that we can work to resolve those conflicts with members of our own community and try and resolve problems instead of having them escalate. So it's just the first of many things we're hoping to work on. But again, the name is Humanity Network. The date is going to be July 8th. And if you're interested, go ahead and send me an email and I will send you more information about that. And everyone is welcome. You don't have to be from Rockingham or Westminster in order to attend. We're open to anyone who would like to develop those skills.
Yeah. Thank you. And as we go on here during the show and hopefully at the end, there'll be links to all this that they'll put in the graphics for this video here. So I don't know if anybody has any more questions or comments, but I think I've given about as much as I have right now. There's a lot more we could talk about, but if you want to look it up, we have comprehensive reports that we can send out. There's also on our websites that we have these listed. So there are 23 or 24, I think, various committees in the House and Senate and the legislature. So we have reports on most of those that we can share, but without taking up hours and hours of your time right now on such a beautiful day, I think unless we have any other comments or questions, I'm about ready to sign off here.
Thanks, Michelle and Mike, for doing this, and I hope more people see it on the recording. It's scant, but it's probably the beautiful day. Appreciate all you're doing.
Well, thank you, Tony. And thanks for all you're doing. All right. Well, thank you for coming out here, and thank you to everybody watching at home. And thanks to the people at our community TV stations. BCTV is the key one here that helps us get this out. And I think Fact TV in Bellows Falls will pick this up as well. They've done a great job during COVID, helping get information out to people. And we thank them for their help in this. And thank you, Michelle. It's been a pleasure working with you. I think you've jumped right in, done some great work, and I look forward to next year when we can actually do this in person.